room. So we're recording now.
All right. Hello, everybody.
Hey.
All right. Well, we've just met for the first time. I'm Kiannaa Sage, and Nicole and I met through her Facebook group. And Nicole posts a lot of spiritual type of information. So we should probably just introduce ourselves for everybody, because I'm going to be meeting your group and you're going to be meeting my group. So let's just let everybody know who we are.
Great. Yeah. So I am Nicole Starbuck, and I am a spiritual mentor and life coach, and I help people become the best version of themselves so they can experience more peace, love, and joy in their lives.
All right. I'm Kiannaa Sage, and I'm a healer, and I've been working with being in sync and helping people to become more in sync with their lives, both mentally, physically, spiritually, and so everything can be in flow.
Love it.
So I'm a part of Nicole's Facebook group, and Nicole posts a lot of spiritual content, and she openly talked about the higher self, and I thought, yes, let's talk about that. So I private messaged her, and I wondered if she would be open to having a discussion about the higher self that we could record, because I don't believe that many people are aware of this technology and how to tap into it and leverage it for their spiritual growth, for just a better life, for more balance, and just everything. So I don't even know where we're going to go with this conversation, Nicole, but we can go several different ways. So we'll just see how this goes. So unscripted.
Unscripted. I love it. It's going to be so good.
Yeah. So let's just go with I'm going to say what I think the higher self is, and then you share what you think the higher self is. So for me, the higher self is a technology in which we are born with. And it's a part of our innate DNA. And essentially, in the simplest terms, I believe that the higher self is awareness, period, end of story. I think that's the simplest way to explain what this technology is. Nicole, what do you think about what the higher self is?
I think it's so neat. You use the word technology because I've never thought of it in that term, technology. But I really think of the higher self as the best version of ourselves. I know we all have different religious beliefs, but if you think about the version that the universe intended for us, the best possible outcome for our lives is what I think of it as. And I like that you said awareness too, because I think of it like this floating entity above me, like literally my higher self.
Right.
That is like looking down at my life. And then the more that I can look up and tune into that, the more in flow and in sync everything else will be.
Well, I say a technology because I think that it is a technology. It's an aspect of ourselves where we can get more information, download. And one thing that I'm aware of with the higher self is that the higher self sees everything.
Yes.
And when you could have this aspect of yourself that sees the past, the present, and the future, you can actually heal all of those aspects with the drop of a hat. I mean, it happens so quickly when you're in tune with the higher self.
Yeah, that's true. And I think so often we get bogged down in what's happening in the here and now, or we get drawn back into what happened in our past, that we're not really looking into the bigger picture of what's possible for our lives. And that's why like you say, the technology of the higher self is so powerful, is that it allows us to see everything, not just the here and now, not just the past.
And even like, I think when we tap into the higher self, we're able to sense like our vastness of our capacity. And I think oftentimes as humans, we get there's so much density here on earth that we can't see. Like we can't see past what's right here in front of us, or what we're being triggered with from the past. And when we can tap into this energy, we heal ourselves in ways that makes things much easier, but also helps us live beyond our imagination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, so I wouldn't say by any means I'm an expert in the higher self technology by any means. I think I'm an expert in my connection with my own higher self. But as far as teaching other people on how to do it, I don't see that as like my primary role. I think my primary role is just to expose people to different ways in which we can operate spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
What is your, like, how do you use the higher self for your work?
So I use it a couple of different ways. One is for myself, right? Specializing in my own personal growth. I believe my mission is to become the best version of myself so I can help others become the best version of themselves. So the more that I grow, the more I can help other people grow. So that's the first way that I use it. And the second way I use it is in helping other people become the best version of themselves. And I feel like, especially with my own intuitive gift, I can really see that version of themselves, their higher self, in a way that they're not always open to that yet. And so, like, because I can see it, I can guide them toward that. And then once they're connected, of course, they continue that journey on their own.
Right. So when you say you use it for yourself first, I mean, that's my answer as well. Like, there are times when I'm disconnected, and I want to talk about that maybe in a little bit, but I use it from the moment I awake. In the morning, I check in, and like throughout the day. And I might do it through multiple forms of just like asking questions. I ask my higher self questions all the time. I was told by a mentor once that, they don't like you asking mundane questions. But I think the more that you build the strength of your relationship with your high self, there's no mundane question. The higher self's role is to be in support of your life here on earth. Mm-hmm. And so I connect all the time. I will ask, should I have pizza or should I have a vegetable, or do I want this, or what's the best thing for me in this moment? Because sometimes, my cravings will get the best of me, and I will choose something that's not really in my highest good. So oftentimes I'll check in with my higher self and ask, like, what's the best thing for me, as far as even eating. And eating is not such a mundane thing, because food too is a technology, and how we incorporate nutrients. I'll just give you an example of what I did just yesterday, because I've changed my diet significantly over the last year. And I've noticed that my body does not, initially, when I changed, I went from just eating whatever I wanted to being much more strict, because I went through a particular cleanse. And with this cleanse, I cut out a lot of food. But what I found is when I started incorporating healthier options more frequently, my body was interpreting it as a foreign substance. So something that you might think like, oh, I'm having spinach and there's no problems with spinach, but my body was actually interpreting it as something foreign, not something nutrition. So yesterday, in fact, I went to Chipotle and I got a veggie, just a bean and rice burrito, and no cheese or anything like that, and no vegetables, and just some lettuce. But when I was leaving, I was like, I don't think my body is interpreting these beans as actually nutritious. And that's not a normal train of thought for me. So I checked in with my higher self to see, does my body receive these beans as nutritional? And the answer was no. And so I had to energetically clear the confusion within my body about what it is I was bringing into my body, so it could be integrated, and also then my digestion would change. And I will tell you, my digestion was totally different from this burrito than the ones I had the week before. So I'm curious, like, that's how, like, I will check in just on food because I'm going through this particular cleanse. But what types of things and how do you check in and what do you ask your higher self?
So for me, it's like an ongoing conversation, just like you do. You're just constantly talking. My higher self is not as kind to me. She kind of talks to me like I'm a little child, and she calls me, I don't even know if it's appropriate to say. She'll be like, bitch, why are you doing that?
Whoa.
Like she talks to me like that. And so like she's very sassy.
But that's how you hear it though.
Right, and that's how I hear it. And she's a much like fiercer version of myself. But I think about this ferocity like super divine feminine. Like if you can imagine being totally in freedom and flow, that's like how she operates. So when I do things that go against that, it's kind of like a slap in the face, like, why are you doing that type of thing. So I can avoid that type of interaction by just asking questions first and then
so how would
taking
you
a line action. Huh?
Let's just go for an example. So you do something and you think your higher self is saying, hey, wake up. What are you doing? Right? So how do you get the message of wake up? How do you internalize that?
It's like if you were sleeping and someone came and slapped you in the face while you were to wake you, like that's what it feels like. And
so you get startled?
It's kind of like, I mean, I make it sound really dramatic, but it's kind of like because there's this ongoing struggle between ego and higher self, right? And the ego is safe and familiar, and the higher self is leading us towards our greater good, but the greater good is unfamiliar, right? And so we retract from things that are the unknown. And what I'm trying to do now is through journaling, through meditation, through all of these other spiritual practices, not allowing myself to be so far gone that it becomes that slap in the face. That it's more that gentle push, that gentle prodding, that come with me kind of journey, not come with me kind of journey.
Right. My experience with my high self is not at all like a slap at all. But I don't really feel like the push pull between the ego. That's not something that I've experienced. But I have experienced a disconnect with the high self, which is one thing that got me really excited to talk to you about this today. Because I think when I like to count things and see like, well, how many blocks do people have traditionally for the higher self? And the number I got was 35. So those are the types of questions that I will ask because I'm very analytical and I like to give people like steps and processes. Like that's how I work in my, like at the end of all my sessions with my clients, I'll always ask, okay, how many days of processing are they going to have? What do they need to, how many things do they need to be mindful of as they're moving forward with their processing and those types of things. I'll always go with numbers. So when we were going to have this call, I was like, well, how many blocks do people typically have with the higher self? And the answer was beyond 35. And I thought, well, I'm not going to come up with all these now. Normally I can come up with 15, maybe even 20. 35 is a lot of blocks. And the reason why I was asking about the blocks is because people wonder why they don't have access, why they aren't more intuitive, why aren't they more able to connect with the energies that I connect with, because anybody can be intuitive and anybody can be a channel and anybody could be a force for light if they have access. We all are given access, as I mentioned at the very beginning, within our DNA. You know, the higher self is essentially light energy. So when people say love and light and this and that, this is the energy in which the higher self is. But there's so many blocks. And I'll just speak for my own self. Over the last 10 years, I have struggled with entity attachments. And I think there's a lot of light workers and healers that have these types of issues. And the way in which I knew is that I could not connect to my high self. So here's something I do every day, all day long, and then all of a sudden it's blocked. And I'm absolutely cannot ask any questions. And I thought it was a bit jarring and shocking, the opposite for me. And that is when I was like, well, how many people have these types of blocks? And what are the blocks? So I'm curious, like, you know, I'm obviously not going to go down a list of 35 different blocks, but there are a handful of them. I'm curious what you think some of the blocks that people have to their higher self is.
Yeah. I jotted down some notes based on
You did.
what I've experienced in my own life and then what my clients have experienced in their lives. So I'll start with some signs that you may have a block and then go into what the blocks may be. And things that I've noticed in my life and my clients' lives are things like increased food insensitivity, which you touched on, when all of a sudden, like, we can't eat the same foods that we used to, or we're just suddenly
And you think that's allergic. A block to the high self?
I think it's a sign that there's some sort of blockage or thing that we need to clear.
Interesting.
Things like when there's a lot of challenges or struggles, or we feel like we are encountering a lot of obstacles. Like when obstacles,
okay,
so challenges or struggles, or when it feels like there's a lot of resistance, like when we like are going, and we're not getting the results we want. Maybe in meditation there's a block. Communication issues, especially in relationships with our spouse, partner, coworkers, usually a sign that there's something going on. But deeper than that, we look at blocks, and I mean, you talked about not trusting your intuition, like feeling like you can't tap into your intuition. I think sometimes we get scared of our own power, that we intentionally block ourselves or subconsciously block ourselves through things like substance abuse, right? Addiction to alcohol, drugs, or other media.
Addictions.
By engaging and staying in toxic relationships or emotionally abusive relationships. If we're in a negative environment, that'll block us for sure. And just surrounding ourselves with the wrong kind of people, I think, can block us as well if you're in a negative environment.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was looking at this list, and what I really feel is you're probably right, there's probably 35 different things, but I think it comes down to fear, right? Well,
that's one big, I mean,
one big block.
Everything.
It's like little bricks within the block, but fear holds us back, and flow allows us to move forward, right?
Right. Totally agree that fear is a big player in the higher self, in life in general. But I do think it breaks down even to more, like you talk about toxicity and relationships and environment, and those can definitely play a role. Like, I'm very sensitive to environments. I assume you are too. Yeah. When I first started going back to the gym, I was beyond overwhelmed with everybody's projections of themselves. Like, if you think about what people are doing in the gym and how there's a lot of self-loathing and self-hate, and it was very difficult for me. So I had to really work with my higher self to get myself in a place where I could go to the gym, because I'm a telepath as well. So I'm picking up on thoughts, not just energy, but their thoughts as well. And so when I go to the gym, I had to figure out a way in which not to block it, but to not let it interfere with what I'm doing now. And it took me some time to figure that out. At first I was bringing crystals, and I had crystals in my pocket.
Crystals at the gym, yes.
This isn't gonna work long term. So I'm gonna had to spend some quality time with my connection. And so I will say right off the get-go, I think one of the number one reasons people are blocked from their high self is their lack of connection to source energy, the divine, as you call it, earth, Gaia, Sophia, whatever names you want to call Mother Nature. I think that is the number one block that people have to their higher selves. I think any disconnection, even my husband, like he'll always ask me to clear him, but I said, finally, I said, like, look, you need to connect with Earth. And if you connect with Earth, then you're not going to have to continue to raise yourself up every single time, because when you have that connection with the energy, source energy, like it changes everything. And I think that you probably agree with this. Like when you're in meditation, you're connecting to source energy.
Sure.
I mean, those of us who are in a practice of meditation, you're not just sitting there peacefully, you're in connection with the divine. Is that accurate for you as well?
Yeah, I always think of 2 cords. This is what I visualize when I meditate. One cord running from the earth to my root chakra all the way up, filling me with light. Mm-hmm. And then another cord from, I guess you would call the divine or the universe, coming down to my crown chakra, filling me with light. So I always think I'm connected to earth and I'm connected to my higher self through 2 cords.
Awesome. The other thing I think that is blocking people is obviously programming, but the imprints. And so some people might not understand what an energetic imprint is, but it's very similar to your thumbprint, like when you're doing fingerprints, only the imprint is energetic. So you can't necessarily see it, but you can for sure feel it. Right? So do you find that with your clients as well?
Yeah. I mean, you taught programming, right? For sure. Like how we were raised and how we were taught. And the energetic imprints is a lot of, and I've struggled with this myself. So I recognize it in my clients as well, where the problem that we think we have is actually an idea of the problem. It's not the problem itself. So expectations about other people are not actually what the other people expect of us, or it's
right.
all our perception, right? Like you may feel stifled in a relationship, not realizing that you're holding yourself back and stifling yourself back because of imprints or programming or whatever.
Right, but an imprint is actually something that can come from it's like bigger than your family, like actual nucleus. It goes to the grandmothers, the grandfathers, the great-grandmothers, the great-father. And let's just say they had an imprint of like suffering, for example. That goes through the whole lineage. So I think those imprints of being blocked from our spiritual growth or being blocked from connecting with Earth can be really a problem. And even bigger than that, I think our belief system, and that goes to how we perceive things, which is what you were mentioning. Our belief systems are so incredibly powerful. I actually had a client last year who I did a number of sessions with around a bunch of issues. But in particular, one thing that I really noticed with this client is that they were fighting for their beliefs about the problem that had already been addressed. So let's just say I had a client that came to me for like chronic depression. And we cleared everything around depression, but we did not clear belief systems. And then what happened is, and they sent me an email, they went and they found all the supporting data for their belief. And our final conversation was like, look, you can fight for your beliefs if you want to. And that might be your thing. But I'm telling you, that's the problem, is that it's a belief. And you need to make a conscious choice to believe things are different. And it's bigger than just perceive things different. It's about telling a different story. Mm-hmm. You know, and we get so locked into our stories about why things are the way they are. And those too block us from our higher self.
So how do we unblock these things, right? Like if we look at generational issues or imprints or we look at programming or any of perceptions, belief systems, what's the first step someone would need to do?
Well, I think that's a really great and powerful question, because, you know, I think when we are in contact with our higher self, we have a willingness and an openness to change our consciousness, right? So if we're tapping into this awesome technology of the higher self that sees past, present, future, and so you have to have an awareness that your consciousness is changing with every contact that you have with your higher self. And I think we have to be open to our consciousness changing. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, to see things differently, to experience things differently, to experience our relationships differently. And I'll go back to what you said with my husband and I. When we are in discord, and, you know, every relationship has discord. Once we come back to center, the first thing I do is check in with both our higher selves and make sure that we're healing whatever aspects need to be in communion instead of in friction. and the results are immediate.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think you touched on it, like awareness. The first thing, right? You have to know that there's a problem to fix the problem. But it's very much like a switch, right? Like, we can dial in or dial out of that energy. We can flip it on or flip it off. And a lot of people don't even aware that that switch is off.
Right.
And I often think of the scene in The Matrix. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's like, take the one pill and you wake up, and take the other and you go back to sleep. And a lot of people they know there's a problem, but they don't want to deal with it, and they go back to sleep and keep doing what they're doing. And that's how you end up with chronic issues, chronic health problems, anxiety, depression. But for those of us that are willing to put in the work, right, to raise ourselves up, we take that other pill, we wake up, we rise, and we realize that we're so much better off making that investment in ourselves than if we were to roll over and go back to sleep.
Right. And even like, I often get messages about people that want to have more intuition and more, they want to see, and they say, will you help me open my pineal gland? And you know, we have to be willing to see things differently, you know, and how spirit comes in and speaks is very different than what you may think it will be. I remember when I first started channeling, and I was like, this is it. Like, like, I thought it was going to be something totally different, you know, because I've seen people on TV, or I've watched Abraham Hicks and whatever. And I just thought it was going to be very different than what my experience is. And how I channel is very different than what I've seen anybody else channel. So I think when we're tapped into our higher selves, what we're tapping into is our uniqueness, and how we express our gifts is very different. And so how these other channels or healers may do their gifts, it's very different from how I experience my own.
Yeah. And you touched on it. Like, how do we develop that? How do we tune into that? And I think it's different for everyone, right? Like, I know for me, one of the ways that I channel really effectively is through creation. And that creation process can change for me. Like, in years past, it was through making visual art, and then now it's more through writing. So some people it's dance or music, or sometimes it's just sitting outside or gardening. Like, my mom gets some of her best ideas and downloads when she's gardening, and I personally do not garden. I think it's so much work. So,
but she's connected to the earth.
She's connected to the earth, and so it really it comes down to what feels good for you. Yeah. What are you feeling called to do? But the more that you lean into that, engage with that, the more you're going to align with your higher self.
Yeah. And I think also that what would be helpful for people to understand about the communication with the higher self is that it's an energy that comes into us before thought. So it's like before we even think the thought, that's the higher self energy. That makes sense?
Right. Yeah. And I was just sharing this in my mastermind group about the intuition and like how do you distinguish the intuition from other thoughts and feelings, and we think about like left brain and right brain, logical thought, and like the fun creative side, and it's like you said, the feeling that comes before the thought.
Totally. And the other thing that I want to make sure that we talk about with the higher self is like, it is like we see, I don't know if you see it out where you are, but here it's very common to have those Christian infinity signs, you know, and it is infinity. The higher self is totally and utterly connected to the infinite. And so when you think about infinity, it can be slightly overwhelming and like, how could I have connection to that? And I think that, you know, a lot of people just don't really understand the oneness and the law of oneness. And I think when you connect with your higher self, you're connected into that. That's like the channel in. That's what my thought is about it. But how do people do it? I think it's much easier than people believe. Well, first, I think, number one, they have to be aware. And I think that even us having this conversation, I don't know how many conversations you have about the higher self with people that are just general folks, but it's not the norm. And that's why I was so excited to have this conversation and for us to record it so that we could do the first step that many people need, is to just know that this is something. And you could Google it and you could research it, and you're going to see that everybody has a different path and how they got connected. And some people might give you a regimented protocol, and others, like myself, I think it's just as simple as asking for the connection and asking for the blocks to be cleared, and they will be cleared. It's the knowing to ask for something you didn't even know was possible.
I'm so glad you said that, like that it can be so simple, because I think we complicate stuff. Like you have to have a 10-step list and a strategy for everything. And it makes me think of this conversation I was having with this woman on Instagram. And she was like, how do I teach my students, my yoga students, how to meditate correctly? I'm like, well, what do you mean correctly? And she's like, well, they say that they're not meditating right, that they're doing it wrong. I'm like, well, is there a wrong way to meditate? And she was like, no. I'm like, well, there's your answer. Like, there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just doing it.
Right. And I think it's like once you have it in your awareness, like let's just say somebody watches this video and they have this new understanding, like, hey, I didn't even know that the higher self existed. Because I know I haven't always known. But once I found out, I was like, well, why isn't anybody talking about this powerhouse? And I think, you know, in the spiritual community, there's a lot of protection of wisdom, if you will. And I don't think people do it purposefully, but I think you're one of the few people, Nicole, that I've come across. And part of the reason why I'm even in your group is just because I was interested in somebody who's going to try and make this go within the spiritual community and really create a community where they're supporting one another. Because I think even within the spiritual community, there's a lot of ego at play. And I remember I was working, this is years ago when I was first getting into the energy in my work. And I used to work with medical intuitives with homeopathics. And I had 2 medical intuitives that I was working with to help we would have homeopathics and then they'd give them to my clients. It was a whole experiment. We were working with flower essences and homeopathics to see how quickly we could get progress. And what I will tell you, this has nothing to do with the higher self, but when you work with homeopathics and flower essences, if you're one of those people that's driven and you want to get results, the results that I found with working with a coach, somebody like me or you, and working with homeopathics remedies, I created a whole line of botanicals for this, but is the results are difference from something that might take you 6 months will be done in like 2 to 3 weeks. That's how quickly when you incorporate. And what are homeopathics and flower essences? It's earth, it's Gaia, it's earth energy, and it's incorporating it into every cell of your system. So where was I going with all of that?
We're talking about ego and how there's a lot of ego in the spiritual world.
Yeah, and they don't share. And or they share with very limited, like they're only going to give you pieces of it. And I found that very frustrating in my own growth. I have had to teach myself a lot of these things. Like I'll watch a video and I'll be like, oh, yes, how does this connect to that? And I am like a detective with my work. So do you find it very difficult within the spiritual community? Like, how did you find out about the higher self?
I'm trying to think of when I first discovered it. It may have been was one of my colleagues. If I'm thinking correctly, it was probably Jasmine Ivy, who was someone that I had worked with in the traditional corporate world, and then she went into spiritual coaching. I went to work for her, and then being around her, I learned about these things.
So it's through exposure, right?
Through exposure. And so here's my thing about this line of work and kind of where I'm shifting towards is and you're right, there's a lot of barriers, and we create a barrier most often through money or access, right? So we create a money barrier saying that you have to have this level of monetary investment, which money is energy. It's not a bad thing. I'm not judging money, but this level of monetary access, or we create some level of exclusivity saying, well, you have to be a part of this group or connect with me here in order to get this information. And I understand it. Like, we as people need to earn a living, and we need to, make ends meet and put that energy out there. But I'm shifting more towards like, what if we just made this available to everyone? And then trust that whatever resources or money or energy we need will come back to us.
Right.
But what if we just shared everything? What if we just made all of our knowledge and tools and resources available and trust that the universe is going to provide for us in whatever way that we need?
I think that's a totally different way of approaching it. And I think that's why we're even having this call, is because both of us are in agreement, at least spiritually. And even, without even, because we've never spoken before, we've had few exchanges at all. And we both wanted to do this. Like I think we both feel like the higher self is that important. Mm-hmm. And that is not about being coveted. It's about people having access to information. And I just don't think there's a lot of people. I think there's a lot of people giving out a lot of misinformation out there. And it gets perceived as information that's of value based on the presentation and based on whether they are quote unquote successful, and the packaging. We put it in a pretty package and then therefore it is what they say it is. And it's really not.
Yeah. It's like, I have a pretty flashy website. Check me out. Yeah. It's true.
Yeah. But I think the higher self is information that, I'm not trying to give access to anybody's higher self other than to let people know, hey, this really exists. This technology exists, and it's not exclusive. Everybody has it. We're born with it. It's in our DNA. It's a part of our light energy stream that we get from the day that we are an embryo and grow into this amazing human being. And, we all can have access. And I think if you feel blocked in it, well, we already talked about, Nicole, that there are so many blocks. And I will come up with the 35. If you want to help me, Nicole, we could do it offline.
Let's do that.
Post them. But I did have a few more. I just want to say, lack of knowledge was one of the blocks, right? We just don't even have an awareness of it. maybe it's in our environment. We're very closed or secluded or toxic, whatever. We just haven't been exposed to people who do this. Entity attachments, ego, you mentioned ego. So an overinflated ego or even a narcissist won't have any access to their higher, they won't have any connection to their higher self. They'll have access, but they may not be connected in. And then mental illness, it was another one that I came up with that was really impactful. And then food, like you mentioned as well. So I think we've given close to 10 of the 35 block. But I just want to thank you for being willing to have this conversation. Is there anything that you think that is really important that we leave people with about the higher self?
I think, and we were touching on it near the end of our conversation, that it's not, I mean, not that it's not good enough, but it's more than just finding that for ourselves. I think once we discover that for ourselves, we have a global responsibility to share that knowledge and awareness with other people. So when I look at my own journey and I look at the journey that I take my clients on, it's one, how can you gain clarity and connection with your higher self? Two, how can you use that to cleanse yourself and to clear your own blocks and to heal all your past wounds and trauma? But then three, like, what are you going to do with that knowledge and information? And I personally feel the calling to share that with others. And a lot of my clients also feel that once they find that healing for themselves and they find that connection for themselves, they then are so passionate about it that they want to go out and share that with others, which is what you and I are doing now.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I'm so excited for people to have an opportunity to watch this, and certainly feel free to reach out to Nicole if you're interested in a private one-on-one session, or myself. And I think we both have different offerings that we offer our respective communities depending on where we're at. And so I'll just share what some of my free experiences are for people. And I do them on different platforms. And I just started doing this. I'm not sure how I'm going to change it, but right now I have a monthly free vitality repair activation that I do with my clients. And I'll be posting those on YouTube. They'll be live, but then you can watch them on YouTube, and then you can get the activations there. And then every month I do an energy recalibration for my clients. And that's a membership-based program, which is the funnest program I have. That's the most exciting thing that I bring to my clients, I think, because it's something I do for myself every month. And so I just figured, well, if I'm doing it for myself, I might as well do it for everybody else who wants to do it too. So that's the energy recalibration. And those are 2 monthly offerings that I offer. What about you? What do you offer that gives people an experience of Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I really like all of the social media stuff. I know some people in the spiritual space are against it because of all the negativity on there. I always try and provide a safe and supportive environment and just an inclusive community. So I offer a lot of my tools and resources through my Instagram, and I also have a free Facebook group where we can get together and just talk about stuff, open up that conversation about what's going on in our lives and what we're going through, and then how we can help each other rise.
Awesome. Well, it's been fun talking with you about this higher self, and I hope that people found this valuable and helpful for them on their spiritual journey.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much for chatting with me about this.
Yes.
I'm excited to share this with the world.
All right. Sounds good.